Kurt, I have some exciting news.
And what is that?
We've hit some milestones for the Misbehavior podcast.
Oh, do tell. I love a statistic. Tell me.
Well, at the conference, we hit our 1,000th download, which was a big milestone.
Yes.
We actually this week got somebody asking to be on our show instead of us reaching out to them, and it's a renowned ethicist.
Oh, wow.
And he's got a new book, and of course wants to get it out to the world. And so we'll announce that in a couple weeks. But that was exciting, and I'm holding our first official fan letter.
Get out of town! It's like an actual letter.
I went out to the post box, and it's like a proper letter. I haven't gotten one of these in maybe years.
Wow.
Colette and Kurt, thank you so much for your encouragement. Misbehavior is one of my favorite podcasts. I proudly support on my iPad and water bottle. Thank you for being such an encouragement, education, and professional development for me. I don't know where I would be this year without the Misbehavior podcast! ! Can't wait to see you at the next meeting.
That is
Love
so
from
sweet.
Our super fan, Tiffany.
Oh, Tiffany. I love Tiffany.
Me too. And I was so sad that Tiffany didn't get to go to the conference to meet us in person, but is diligently working away at their dissertation.
So for some people, we might be their favorite higher education podcast about student conduct.
It might. Kurt, you and I have had a debate about whether that should be our tagline, that we are higher education's favorite.
I think we can just safely say that we're the second favorite student conduct podcast.
I'm very
okay with
comfortable.
That.
Me too.
It's not a race.
This week we have a really interesting interview that kind of breaks all the rules, which I love,
Yes.
of talking about student conduct and working with different types.
I really enjoyed the conversation, and to get the perspective of somebody who is a part of the neurodivergent community, fascinating. Not just from like the student perspective, but also, coworkers who may be on the spectrum. So fascinating.
We met, this was Jamie D'Amico from Fortified Coaching, and we talked about him as a student, him getting in trouble, him being an RA, and then finding himself in a career that is helping other people make sense of things that didn't make sense.
And so much of it I thought was relatable. I can't wait for people to hear the story about the first encounter that Jamie had with some students who were maybe doing something nefarious, because I feel like it was a struggle I would have had as a student as well, or as an RA as well.
I think I needed to get shaken out of my, we train RAs, we hire the right people, we train them the right way, and then they'll just do everything we ask them to do. And he gave us an honest perspective on, not everyone does. And they might have honorable reasons, or there might be opportunities for us to just be better as professionals in preparing these young people for hard jobs.
I think also just being open to, are there different ways to get to the same outcome? And, I'm not advocating for throwing policy out the window, obviously, but, it does raise the question, what are we trying to accomplish when we set these expectations up for RAs?
I love it. Let's introduce the world to Jamie D'Amico. Hello and welcome to Misbehavior. My name is Colette.
And I'm Kurt.
And we're your hosts to talk about all things college student conduct. Today we have a guest, Jamie D'Amico. Jamie, we are eager to get started because I know that you have stories. But why don't you tell the world who you are, what you do?
I'm going to start with, back in 1998, my fifth year of college, I was an RA at the University of Dayton, where I didn't work directly for Colette, but she was one of the leaders of the resident life organization. And that's the beginning of how I ended up here today. But after a long marketing career, I decided that I needed a career change because I was really sort of tired of making a lot of money for private equity firms and kind of wanted to help people. Imagine that. And I ended up going back to school, which was an interesting process. And we may get into me and school later on, but I did a program at Georgetown University in executive leadership coaching. And that's what I'm doing now, making my living as an executive leadership coach. But that has very interestingly caused me to come face to face with myself in a very interesting way that has also affected me professionally, which is I knew that in order to get through school, unlike my undergrad, I needed to come to terms with the fact that I am neurodivergent. And when I started working with my own brain in a way that was making me more successful, the universe has a way of playing jokes on you, and it decided that I was going to also start working with people who are neurodivergent in a professional capacity, which is something I never wanted to do. I thought, I drive myself crazy. Why do I want to work with people who are like me? But here I am, so I'm kind of straddling an interesting line there.
We are going to talk about college, Jamie.
Oh, God.
And I have questions about Colette, so this is an unexpected treasure for me.
Okay.
We seem to only bring on people that will say really nice things to us, so...
Oh, well, depending on the question, maybe we can change that trend.
Well, we usually ask, as an icebreaker, what were you like in college, and did you get in any trouble when you were a student?
So college for me was the tale of two halves, but for me it was, well, I was there 5 years, so 40% versus 60%. My first 40%, I was desperate to fit in. I wanted to be like everyone else. I was a little bit on the studious side. I had my first girlfriend ever, who I met before my first class, and I was a relationship guy. And she had a ton of social anxiety, so that meant that, weekends came around and we mostly stayed in. Well, the following 60%, I really kind of spread my wings. I became a bit of am I allowed to say a bit of an asshole in certain ways, that began actually the beginning of my freshman year. I decided that, nobody messes with the mean girls, so I'll be a mean girl and I'll be aggressive, and people won't mess with me. Now, I've gotten pushback on it that I wasn't really that way. It's just sort of in my mind. But so, the final 60%, I was really kind of developing my own individuality. I was learning, I was less studious. I was learning how to play the drums. I really saw myself as far more of a social creature, much to my detriment a lot of the time.
And tell us about a time that you got in trouble.
Oh, that, yes. It was first semester of my freshman year. I walked onto the girls' floor where my girlfriend lived, thinking that I was going to sneak my way into her room, and there was an RA right down the hall who just marched on down, and I was cited for visitation.
And do you remember what happened? Like how it was handled?
Absolutely. I came up with a little bit of a BS story, but I had to meet with the area coordinator of the dorm, and, he sort of had to ask me the questions. What were you doing? I said, well, this is where the BS came in. I'm like, honestly, I needed some Advil. I had a splitting headache. We weren't paying attention at the time. We just walked right in, and that was that. It was stupid. I didn't pay attention, and yeah, I got what I deserve, which is to be written up. And he just kept saying, be careful, be careful, be careful. Like, that was the extent of it. I was fined $50. I had to write an essay about my behavior, and I was supposed to do a Saturday morning at 8 o'clock study hall. And the beauty of that was I walked down to the study hall and whichever RA was supposed to be tending to it didn't show up. So by 8:15 I was back in bed.
Well, what was the study hall supposed to accomplish?
Oh, it was just your penance, you're going to be inconvenienced for doing something wrong, basically. Just part of the punishment.
Like breakfast club.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking
Punitive.
how odd it seems, like a visitation policy. Am I just so far removed from this at this point that this is still something that happens, or is this now an antiquated thing?
I don't know the answer to that, Colette.
Religiously affiliated campuses I was on did have different policies. One called them parietal hours.
Parietal hours?
I'm curious now, yeah. I've only worked at independent schools now for a couple decades, so I don't know. But I just met with someone from Notre Dame this morning, and she was talking about the women's residence halls and the men's, so I'm thinking that
Wow.
some of this stuff is definitely still in place.
Well, it makes perfect sense, because if you have them living separately, then they couldn't possibly be doing anything the church doesn't want them to.
Sure. Just makes sense. But then chapter next is you became an RA.
Yes, I did. I was going back for my 5th year because, well, there's a bit of a story behind that, but I was not doing well in school and dropped a bunch of classes, and I was not going to be able to afford a 5th year. My deal with my parents was I had to pay for 50%, and they would pay the other 50%, and that was the out-of-pocket expense. That did not include student loans. My family was not in a position to finance a private college at the time. But I started working at a very young age. It was a goal. I was delivering newspapers at 11, and I was, working at 16, and I was prepared to do it. But I did not prepare myself financially for a 5th year. So the only way I was going to pull that off was to become an RA, which I had considered because I had become I had a pretty good relationship with a gentleman who you worked for, who was an area coordinator when I was a sophomore. He was area coordinator of the dorm that I was in, that being John Govednik. And when I reached out to him and said I was interested in being an RA, he really convinced me that it would in fact be a good idea. And I also didn't really have any friends anymore because they had all graduated. So that combined with the fact that I saw an opportunity to live alone, that was really appealing to me, so I thought. And interestingly, since then, I have had roommates every step of my adult life because I'm so socially dependent.
So every step is like the textbook of how not to do it. Like, get in trouble and lie,
Yes.
but then give the student sanctions that don't really address anything. It didn't sound like
yes.
any of that was educational. It just reinforced that lying is definitely the way to go here.
Right. It was 100% punitive without any educational or behavioral adjustment or even understanding. It was, you did something wrong, you go directly to jail, don't pass go, don't collect $200.
Yep. And then, and I'll admit, I applied to be an RA maybe for nefarious reasons. I wanted a single room.
Yeah, and I can tell you, honestly, there's never been anything I wanted to do less than be an RA. And it ended up being a tremendous experience. But I also got to know other RAs and some of the pathologies that go into it, which were very different from mine. And I didn't get along with most other RAs very well. And there were a lot of reasons for that, but namely, I saw myself as a member of the community, not as somebody who was out there to force punishment on people. And I feel like my approach ended up, I felt like it was very successful for what I was setting out to do. But anyway, I don't want to hijack your your podcast or.
No, I'm fascinated by this because I think we think a lot alike. And yet this is stuff I really care. Like, I care a lot about doing it right.
Okay.
What would have happened to Jamie if there had been a different conversation back then?
That's really interesting that you ask that question, because I had a good relationship with John, who was willing to overlook whatever the visitation issues I had were visitation issues. The fact that I violated the policy once, my issues. Thank God he didn't look at it and say, well, that first semester freshman year poor decision definitely means that he cannot handle the responsibilities that come along with being a resident assistant. I know, based on speaking with you, that there's definitely institutions that say, well, if you don't have a spotless record, we don't want to talk to you. And I sort of wonder about that, because I can tell you that from one semester to the next in college, I was not the same person. And from my first to my fifth year, I could not have been more different than I was. In that time frame, it was almost as though I had aged about 10 years in only 5.
Should we jump right ahead to the neurodiverse stuff?
Sure, we can definitely do that, because I think that very interestingly, I was thinking about it earlier, kind of plays into some of the RA personalities that I sort of saw as archetypes.
Oh, say more about that.
Oh, say more about that. Well, okay.
RA archetypes, yeah.
Yeah, so it was my impression that there were a few different types of people that became RAs. There were people that just really wanted to be embedded into the community. They just had this deep desire to kind of, maybe they were the student government type, or maybe they did a lot of volunteering, but they just really wanted to be embedded in it. Then there were people like me who needed the money, but didn't really want to do it. And then there are those that really want to have a position of authority. And a fourth type are the folks that I think are well aware of the fact that they are not doing well socially, cannot find a roommate or people to live with. And that is a way to get out from under it by say, oh, well, I didn't want to do that anyway. This is what I want to do.
So, lonely people. Kurt, can I run this through your calculus?
Yeah.
Those archetypes. I was writing notes here. So,
Were you
community,
really?
authority, money, and loneliness.
I think I was all of those at the same time. Because I think the authority piece was appealing to me because my personality type, there were roles, and, I wanted the residence halls to be a good place, but I also needed money, and I also didn't have a lot of friends. So, yeah, It checked off a lot of boxes for me, too, in those categories.
Oh, that's interesting. Because for me, through my 4 years, I had a core group of people that I was really close with that are still my best friends today. And I was just flat depressed when they graduated and I was going back for a new year. They were the best friends I'd ever had in my life. I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. So I just, I really clung to them. But, with them going away, it was sort of this idea that I had to start over. So I had massive loneliness going into it as well, and also needed the money. But the very interesting part about it is when I look at the folks who I labeled as being the ones that were without friends, I'm now seeing a lot of crossover with neurodivergence. And, I don't want to say this like it's a blanket statement, because it's certainly not. But I can point to a few people specifically that I would say, working with folks who are neurodivergent now, if I met them now, I would say, you know what? I suspect they're probably on the autism spectrum. And showing up as not necessarily doing well socially, so then it's hard to find roommates or people that you can really bond with. That's a huge challenge. But the other thing is the incredibly black and white way of viewing the rules, which is, I remember so vividly having an argument with the other RAs, which was, hey, don't write up your own residence. Call someone else, have them write up your residence. You don't need to live next door to your enemy. And they would say, well, no, they broke the rule. You have to. And this would go back and forth. And at the time, I was like, are you an idiot? Do you know what you are doing to yourself for the rest of the year if you start doing that to your neighbors? And there was not a lot of getting through. Now, I was to the very far end of the spectrum, which was I wanted people to think I was cool. I wanted to be liked. I wanted to be cool. I wanted recognition and adulation and all the good things. So I could get that as an RA by being the person with the people on my floor that would not, I wouldn't say let them get away with things, but turn the other way if it wasn't egregious, or give them warnings. Like, hey, I know what you guys plan on doing tonight. I'm doing rounds at 11. Get the hell out of the building by 11, and we won't have a problem.
I do like the approach, though, of thinking of yourself as somebody there who is there to be a part of the community and to facilitate community. And I always felt the same way, that, that and enforcing policy, they're incongruent with each other. In fact, they smack up against each other in a way that makes it so that if I have to write this person up, they're not coming to a social program the next day.
Right.
They're not going to participate in whatever team building activity we're doing. So I think it's a solid approach. I wish I would have thought of it 30 years ago.
Yeah, but again, I was coming from a perspective of, at the time, 21-year-old me really needed to be liked. I was still sort of, like I mentioned, growing up, I didn't have a lot of friends. I was still kind of fighting that battle a little bit, well, a lot. So that was what I needed, was for people to say things like, man, you're the coolest RA ever. Like, oh, well, you just touched my soul. But that's not to say that nobody ever got in trouble in my watch, because if you were rubbing my nose in it, that was that. Like, don't treat me like I'm an idiot. And just an anecdote, I remember the very first time after the year had started and people had moved in, it was like the next day. And there was a kid who lived down the hall from me with his 3 roommates, and his older brother was one of my best friends. And I go walking down the hall to actually knock on his door, and his 2 roommates had just come in through the staircase, and they had backpacks on, and I knew immediately what was in the backpacks. And it's like, it's very obvious when they're that rectangular shape and a specific size of what it is. And they stop and they look at me, and they just stop dead. They're like, uh-oh. And I look at them and I go, oh, God. And I turned and I walked back to my room, and then my friend's brother came over. He's like, hey, what's going on? I'm like, not much, what's going on? He's like, just coming down here to see if I need to smooth things over. And that was such a learning moment for me, because I was very tied in knots, because I knew what was going on, but I also knew I didn't have enough evidence to sort of pull the trigger on anything. And I had just gone through training. I had been told all of the things I needed to do that were my responsibility, and I wanted to live up to the responsibility. But that's the time I looked the other way, and I convinced myself that if they start drinking in the building, if they're making a scene, maybe that's when I have to deal with it. Maybe it's not the moment I suspect that they will be drinking. I don't know if that's a good or bad story.
Yeah, it's an honest story. And now I am wondering, what was the fear? If you were to report the stuff, not having 100%, there's no DNA evidence of it, but you have good spidey senses or more.
Right.
There is evidence. What's the fear you think for that young person taking the next step to just tell somebody what happened?
I think the fear there is, well, that was an interesting situation because this guy who I really liked, his older brother, was one of my best friends. And there was a fear of burning a bridge. There was the fear of burning bridges early in the year. And also, I was the advocate of you don't write up your own people because you don't want an enemy in your backyard. So I probably should have went to my boss and said, look, this was my experience and I was really uncomfortable with it. But in hindsight, I could have been coached on the right way of handling that sort of situation. But I was worried that was then going to set the path of me being looked at as bad at my job. And I didn't want to be bad at my job.
Oh, so there's the performance part.
Right.
Too.
Yeah, I was literally letting the hierarchy down.
I wonder, so much now I think about the way our RAs, their supervisors talk about rules. It is very much about complying or not complying. It's not about why.
Right.
And could we provide better training programs to make sure we have a why?
The why has always been incredibly important to me, and that is something that is fairly common with a neurodivergent brain, because it was explained to me this way, and this may be useful information because I know that you guys run into neurodivergent brains, but people who are ADHD look at things a little bit differently. A person did this model. She took marshmallows and toothpicks and she put them together in a line and said, this is how neurotypical brain works. And then she handed it to somebody and said, make whatever shape you want. And it was, it was a boondoggle, as you would imagine. And she said, okay, this is what the ADHD brain does with thoughts, but the marshmallows are the thoughts. The ADHD brain pays much closer attention to the connections between the thoughts. That's what the ADHD brain values, is the connection between thoughts, much more so than the thoughts themselves. So that's why every time you're speaking to somebody like me, there's a parenthetical reference to something else, and then you're on a totally different track, because that's how that brain is valuing their thoughts.
It's what Colette and I were talking about when you came into the podcast was I was reflecting on my sort of evolution of understanding, I guess, the existence of neurodivergent people, or having vocabulary for it. Thinking back to when Colette and I worked together, it was early 2000s. For me, that was one of the first times where I became aware that we had neurodivergent students living in our residence halls, but we didn't have words for what we were experiencing. So it's fascinating to me that, fast forward 30 years, I feel like we have a lot of vocabulary around it. I don't know if we're still doing justice to supporting the neurodivergent community, especially in conduct settings or in stressful situations, but it's been interesting to watch that evolution of language, at the very least.
Yes, there's the saying, you name it to tame it. That's sort of a mental health thing that people talk about. You name your emotions so you can wrap your arms around it. But it's the same thing with things like neurodivergence or really anything that involves the brain, I will say. Because, back at we'll call it the turn of the century, I struggled with my own diagnosis, which came when I was in third grade, which I think was 1984. I was diagnosed with ADHD and put on Ritalin, which made me a pioneer for both. And I spent a good portion of my life being told by people that it doesn't exist, I just don't want to sit still, or I just don't want to learn, or all of these other things that, now I realize all the people that I ostracized because I couldn't deal with their social graces because they were different than other people's. When, in reality, if I had asked, they would have said, no, I don't understand social cues. Please tell me, because intellectually I can work with it.
I don't know if this is too steep a transition, but our Title IX spaces, I think, are flooded with students on the spectrum who are read a certain way and seen as creepy or not understanding boundaries or not respecting boundaries. And we see it with college age folks. It's got to be happening in the workplaces all over too. And what are your thoughts on that?
The difficulty with that is in the workplace, in social settings, it's still viewed as a weakness. And people don't want to show weakness. In the workplace, people don't want to report that, hey, I am on the autism spectrum. Here are some things that I struggle with, because you're worried about getting a target placed on your back. And I feel like that is one of the most destructive things that we can do with neurodivergence, is try to hide it or go the other direction and excuse it. There's a level of education that people need. And if it is somebody who's labeled as creepy or hyper or whatever that is, if they can have a conversation with the person and say, oh, geez, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. And the person had a cursory understanding of, okay, here is a challenge that society creates for these people. That understanding, and there's a lot more, I think, grace being given to people. But again, I believe that we are responsible for our own actions, and it is incumbent on the person who is neurodivergent to learn from their mistakes too. Because I have been in environments where, it's like there's a conference that I spoke at earlier in the year, and there was an awful lot of green lighting all kinds of behavior. And the speaker that I appreciated the most was the one who said, stop excusing everything. The 80% of the world is one way, and we're the 20% that are the other way. They should be more understanding, but it's not up to us to change everyone else. We still have to work within boundaries. At the same time, they need to do better understanding. And how can we do that? By advocating for more education.
Jamie, I'm curious, do you think we do a better job, writ large in higher education, of supporting students or our fellow coworkers who may be on the spectrum, or do you think we're just missing we're not hitting the bar on any front?
That's a little bit difficult for me to say, because I don't spend day after day in higher education, and I want to be very transparent about that. Mm-hmm. But I think that there are still, in any environment, there are still attitudes that are not helpful. There's, like I said before, there's the people that will literally say, no, you did it because you wanted to behave that way, or you didn't understand because you didn't want to, or you just weren't listening because you didn't want, all of those things, and trying to attribute characteristics of people and features of being neurodivergent attributing that through the lens of people who are neurotypical. And I think that we have come a really long way. I think that currently there is certainly I would say it's been in retrograde a little bit in regard to a lot of the things that we can label as social issues. And this could be considered a social issue, and even even a medical issue. The medical community has recently come out and said, well, you know what, we decided that we think stimulant medication for people with ADHD is bad. It wasn't based on any research. That research was settled 25 years ago. Like, cases open and shut. We have all the information we need on it. It's not bad. It's bad in the wrong doses. And it's also not abused by the people that it is prescribed to, because the first thing anybody with ADHD will tell you if they take too much of their stimulant medication is they don't like the way it makes them feel. So as long as we can look at this from a mindset of trying to move the conversation forward and not turn the clock back on some of these issues, I think that we are in a position where we can keep doing better. Because there's people like the two of you. I can't imagine people wanting to do more for students than you, Colette. We speak almost monthly these days, and I've never met anybody who cares more about the, we'll say the growth of students. And I would imagine, Kurt, that the reason you're here with Colette is because you view things very similarly, And I think it's people like you are going to be, or will continue to be, great evangelists for people of, we'll say, my ilk, that are neuro-spicy. Because in addition to ADHD, I'm also dyslexic.
I do love the phrase neuro-spicy. One of my side passions is I'm the president of a nonprofit for an LGBTQIA plus group, and it was not on my radar until a couple of years ago that a large portion of the trans and non-binary population also, there's a Venn diagram of neurodivergent folks in there as well. So we have a youth group that runs once a month, and our person who runs it is amazing, but she has very quickly had to get herself up to speed on how to work with, as a neurotypical person, how to work with neurodivergent or neurospicy youth.
You are 100% right about that, and that's something that I'm going through a certification program for coaching people who are neurodiverse. And about a month ago, that the LGBTQIA plus community is one of the things that came right out and said was, hey, if you're in a room full of folks, you can expect that a very large percentage may well be on the autism spectrum, and here's how you can sort of figure it out. And one of the things that she pointed out was, we were told specifically, people that derive at their identity entirely through their orientation is oftentimes a good bet that there may be some neurodivergence. When they're taking something from outside of themselves and saying, no, all of this is me. Or the people that, everything they do is cats. And every shirt has a cat on it, and every poster on the wall has a cat on it, and, just another example. Their identity is, I'm a cat person.
All right. Have grace. Last year, I was hired at a school that had dealt with a lot of pro-Palestinian protest stuff that just went wrong. It wasn't handled great by the school, and working with the students was very challenging. And I thought, like, oh, I'm going to come in, I'm going to be so good at this. But I met a lot of students who could only see black and white, would not even engage in a conversation about nuance. And then I got on ChatGPT because I was afraid to talk about it, and I asked AI, why am I seeing a disproportionate number of genderqueer folks in these protest meetings about Palestinian students? And now I'm wondering, is there a Venn diagram that's all connecting here?
I would venture to say the answer is yes.
And then what should I have done to try to have more productive conversations? Because I was trying to talk about the gray areas and the nuance and how do I help you really make a social change that you want to make that's a good change, and just dealing with defiance. And now I'm like, oh, could I have seen it through a different lens?
That sounds like an unbelievable challenge, and I'm not even sure what in that situation you could have done, because you are dealing with such a challenging topic to begin with, where people are going to dig in and they're not going to really want to listen to the other side just out of the gate. And plus, you're in a position where you're dealing with students, so you have people that hormonally are going to be in very, very different places from each other. You know, some at 20 years old are still children, and some are still some have become adults with their chemistry, and it's I don't know what you could have done in that situation. It sounds like an unwinnable position that you were put in, because you would have to know how to navigate not only that situation, but also navigate these special brains that were gravitating toward it. Mm-hmm. And, I could throw out a couple things like, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that, but I feel like that's even above my pay grade. If you actually want that kind of advice, I know a great woman you could speak to.
I don't want to do it the same way again and not help.
Yeah, well, if I, just on a base level, what tends to get through is helping people understand that people are different from them for different reasons, and they're not necessarily negative reasons, and that is a hard thing to do with an issue like that. So much of it has to do with helping their understanding of the fact that people act different, think different, and it's, even though their brains are telling them everything is black and white, the majority of the world exists in a gray area that maybe they can't see. If they can grasp that, you have honestly taken them to like the PhD levels of self-discovery.
It feels like atomic level, like what a breakthrough that would be.
How would you do that? You've got people that are angry, that just want to yell. You have underdeveloped brains because of their age, and I don't mean underdeveloped as though there's something wrong with them. Their brain is still developing. So they don't have the cognition, and then you add the neuro-spiciness on top of it. Oh, gosh. Man, is it good that I work with adults, mostly?
The consequences are different.
Oh, they certainly are. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you one more question. This is a softball. You and I both work remotely. And there are more and more colleges that I hear about colleagues being told they have to go back to work. And in this space, the discipline space, I feel like being on Zoom is a superpower in terms of engagement. And I wonder, it doesn't have to be about neurodiversity or anything, just you working at home versus you going to an office.
Okay, I'm working at home because I'm self-employed, and it financially wouldn't make sense for me to rent office space. I don't have a team, so I'm a solopreneur. One of the absolute worst things for me is working alone. I lose all of my productivity when I'm not around people and don't see other people working. The other thing I end up missing, I mentioned being utterly socially dependent, is those water cooler conversations. I can't tell you how much I appreciate them, and how sometimes just the funniest things that could ever occur just happen to waltz by you, like the time my former colleague, who was an MMA fighter from Paris, comes walking by my desk singing this very thick French accent, I'm still Jenny from the block. It was like the funniest thing that happened that entire year.
That's going on TikTok, by the way.
Yeah.
But I'm actually discovering that there are things out there that really help, and it's especially people with ADHD are particularly susceptible to losing productivity, which is there is a website. Can I say the name?
Sure.
Okay. ND Hive, the letter N, the letter D, Hive is where I've been going, and it's been amazing. It is basically online co-working space.
Oh, wow.
You go there, and it's people on a screen, it's Zoom, but when you get there, the first thing they will do is they'll ask you, what are you working on? What's the priority? All right, what's your deadline? They'll ask you these questions, and they will occasionally ask you for updates if you want it. And they have two different rooms there. There's the silent room when you need to concentrate, but science is showing that seeing other people working on screens, whether you're neurodivergent or not, does increase productivity by over 40%. And then there's another room, I like to call it the water cooler room, where you can have those side conversations, and you chat, you talk, and when I've had enough and I need to really zero in on something, I'll just I'll turn the volume off. But it feels like I have coworkers, and it has been a godsend.
I'm going to look this up. I
I
love
wrote it down
this.
too. I think that's
Yeah.
really cool.
Oh, cool.
I have one other question, if I can ask.
And I think I know what's coming. I can't wait.
So when Colette and I worked together, she was kind of a fashion maven on our campus. If you can imagine an entire sea of taupe turtlenecks and mock faux Dickies, Colette would show up in what looked like she was about to go out for a night on the town. But completely professional, of course. Did this start at Franklin and Marshall, or did you know her? Did you know her to be a fashion maven at your school?
I knew Colette to look good. The majority of the time, the way I describe my experience with Colette in general is she just got it, and it was all facets. She dressed the part, she looked the part, and she definitely acted the part. And honestly, that's what has caused me to search Colette out many years later. Is she's the one person from Resident Life that wasn't like my age, who I really felt like a kinship with, and we barely knew each other. But I remember, may I tell one last story here? It was my 5th year, and it was homecoming. And I was walking back to the dorm, and I ran into Colette, and I stopped you, and I said, hey, you know what? I wish we worked together more often, because you just get it in a way that the rest of them don't. You seem to have priorities that are different, and it works much better with my sort of value system and alignment, as opposed to some of the others that they just didn't seem like they were viewing the world from the same perspective I was, but I was always under the impression that Colette did.
If someone wanted to seek out your consulting services, how would they find you?
Oh, they can find me by going to either LinkedIn and look up Jamie D'Amico, or they can go to my website, which is fortifycoaching.com.
All right, friend.
Jamie, nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. Great to meet you, Kurt.
Misbehavior is written and produced by Colette Shaw and Kurt Doan. Theme music was written and performed by Kevin MacLeod from incompetech.com. You can contact Ms. Behavior at msbehaviorcollege@gmail.com. That's msbehaviorcollege@gmail.com.